This is At Issue on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm John Munson. Well, trends. If you can get out ahead of them, you can make money, or you can take advantage of a situation, or you can prepare yourself for the worst, whatever it might be. Trends are hot news everywhere. They don't always get the kind of coverage that some people think they should. We're going to talk trends today with economic forecaster Gerald Celente, and we'll talk about things we can expect to see this spring and beyond. Gerald Celente is publisher of the TrendsJournal and founder and director of the TrendsResearchInstitute. Welcome back to At Issue.
Oh, thanks for having me on, John.
All right, let's get right into it. First of all, let's start globally. What are the global trends you're seeing emerge?
Well, just pick up yesterday's Financial Times. Read the front page headline. Pessimism deepens over global economy. Survey downbeat on U.S., EU, and China. And it's a global slowdown. And then you pick up today's paper, and you read about how the ECB, the European Central Bank that's going to be meeting, is contemplating again lowering interest rates. And that's the only thing that has kept these economies going, a combination. Historically low interest rates. I just bought a property, a historic building, historically low interest rates. I bought a 1773 building, and I got a mortgage for 2.875%. It's unheard of. So then you look at the other issue of all the trillions of dollars being printed through bond buying and treasuries, and not only in the United States. Here we call it quantitative easing. Japan just announced they're doing $1.4 trillion worth. And over in Europe, they call it ongoing monetary transactions. So all this has not been able to reinvigorate the economy. And so we see continued slowdown, and I'm still very bullish on gold, even though it's retreated. And I could go into that later, why, if you like. But I began buying gold in 1978. My first buy was $187.50 an ounce. And I remember when it crashed, began to crash in January of 1980. I remember it well. I bought it at the highest trading level of the day, 875, and it went down from there and didn't return to those marks till well into the 21st century. So this is a very different emotion right now. It's a very different time. Back then there was no Russia. It was the Soviet Union. Back then there was no China. What do we know? A little bit about Mao. In India, people didn't know much about that back in 1980 either. So now it's a global economy. It's very different, and it's all slowing down.
Well, this printing money can't go on forever, can it?
That's why I'm bullish on gold. You see, I'm not one of those people that believe that the gold is going up because of inflation. I believe it's going to go up because of a debasement of the currency, and that's what they're doing. They're devaluing the currency by printing it. So what does that mean? It means that a pound of coffee won't go up, but if you're importing it from somewhere else, you're going to be paying for it more because the value of your currency is going down. And you have to look no further than Japan. Since the new prime minister took over, Abe, in December, the yen has dropped some 20%. So now you think about it. Okay, Japan relies a lot on oil and other natural resources, don't they? That's right. So everything they buy is going to cost more. So the price of a barrel of oil has actually decreased since December. But not for the Japanese. They're going to be paying more because the value of their currency has declined. And the only reason the United States dollar has not declined more is because so many other countries are doing the same thing. As I said, all of the Eurozone, with their ongoing monetary transactions, the United States, Japan, and even China. What China's doing differently is they're building their infrastructure with their money rather than using it for other purposes. So they're keeping their economy afloat as well by printing more money and lowering interest rates and making loans available at under very easy terms.
Well, the combination of printing more money and government austerity was supposed to bring the economies of the world back. That has clearly not happened.
And again, the only people that said that was going to happen with the so-called authorities. Everyone knew it was going to. We've been covering this since it happened. It's just pure common sense. Yeah, by the way, you think of that term austerity. What does it really mean? Well, it means that the banks made bad bets, and they don't like to take any losses. So let's go to Ireland, where it first started to hit real bad. It wasn't as though the Irish banks had this money. They borrowed it. Who did they borrow it from? Well, they borrowed it from Bundesbank, Societe Generale. They borrowed it from banks in the United States. And all of a sudden, the economy collapses. The Ponzi scheme busts. And now they're facing a lot of losses. The banks want their money back. The Anglo-Irish banks, the other one, we don't have the money. But you're the German banks, the Brussels banks, the American banks. We want our money. Okay, I have an idea. We're going to call it austerity measures. Now, remember, the people don't have jobs; they're losing them. If they have jobs, they're not doing well. A lot of people are losing jobs. The economy's going down. I have a brilliant idea. We're going to tax the people more. We're going to force them to pay the bad bets that the other big banks made. We're going to cut their pensions and benefits, and their retirement age, we'll move that up to maybe till after they die. So all this ever was a bailout scheme for the banks. They call it austerity measures. They have driven every country that has facing them into severe recessions. And here is the total hypocrisy. Think about the United States having a Great Depression. We had about 22-25% unemployment. Do you know they still don't call what's going on in Greece with nearly 30% unemployment, in Spain with nearly 30% unemployment, a depression? They call it a recession. And you have youth unemployment in places like Portugal, Spain, Greece. And on average in the Eurozone, youth unemployment is probably about between 30 to 35%. So it's a depression. Bulgaria, Romania, you could keep going around.
So what is this? Let's turn it back on the United States then. What does this all mean for business in the U.S. of A.?
Look at the numbers that came out. Yesterday, durable good numbers came out. They weren't as good as expected. Look at retail sales in March. They were much lower than expected. Look at the dining of the casual dining sector. It's down. And what happened in the U.S., of course, both presidential candidates promised that they wouldn't raise the taxes on the people. But, of course, after the election, payroll taxes went in, and they hurt the people that could afford it the least. So it's more of the same but worse. It's a continual decline. Again, I'm not making these facts up. Here's another fact. The jobs lost since the Great Recession have been mostly middle-income paying jobs. The jobs created since the recession have been mostly low-paying jobs. So you can see where the future is heading by looking at the data.
What about which businesses are going to, do you think, are going to thrive in the next 12 months?
The things that continue to grow, of course, is anything in the health field. But of course, that's a tricky element as well. We have an aging and a very unhealthy population. We have obesity. We have more people on prescription drugs than anywhere else in the world per capita. And again, the aging population. And so anything having to do with health, but then you go into the other areas, the whole health healing. This big movement, here we are in spring, summer's just on the doorstep, this whole local movement and craftsmanship. There are a lot of opportunities. I have to tell you, the big game changer that we keep talking about, if you go back to the 90s, I wrote my book Trends 2000 in 1994. I was very, very attuned to the times. And all of a sudden this thing happened, the computer revolution. And then there was the dot-com boom. It changed the economy. Remember George Bush lost to Bill Clinton. And, the economy was doing lousy in the early 90s. We need something like that. And I really believe that the big game changer, that could, everything I said could mean absolutely nothing, is if we come out with a real alternative energy. And I'm not talking about wind, solar, geothermal, or biofuel, but a real breakthrough. And I believe that breakthrough is possible. It's just that we haven't put our resources or our minds to it. Because if you could imagine, if we had an alternative energy that was virtually, low cost and renewable, it would be a whole game changer. And it's not that far-fetched. I mean, go back to the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. There was no refrigeration. Automobiles were just, coming about. There was no television. There was no, it was a whole different era. And so the changes could happen. And to me, necessity is the mother of invention. And if we put our human and financial resources into creating a different future, then I believe it could happen.
Listeners, what do you think? Do you have questions for economic forecaster Gerald Celente? And where do you think we're heading? 800-642-1234. 800-642-1234. It's a toll-free number. You can also communicate via email. The address is talk@wpr.org, talk@wpr.org, or you can find us on Facebook. When we come back, Gerald Celente, I want to talk about what you have. I want to hear what you have to say about the future of democracy in the United States and the world. Another important area of the forecasting that you're doing. It's at issue. It's on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. I'm John Munson. Stick with us. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. Here's what's coming up tomorrow afternoon on At Issue at 3 o'clock. From the latest discoveries in paleontology to just why the dinosaurs vanished, we'll discuss these mysterious creatures with a science writer and dinosaur lover. That's tomorrow at 3 here on At Issue. This hour, we're getting some trends forecasting from economic forecaster Gerald Celente. And he is publisher of the TrendsJournal and founder and director of the TrendsResearchInstitute. 800-642-1234, the number to call to join our program. You can also send an email, talk@wpr.org. So, Gerald Celente, you have a lot of things to say in your most recent set of forecasts about the future of democracy in the United States and in the world, particularly in the wake of the Boston Marathon bombing. I will read to you from our winter 2012 Trends Journal, so a little over a year ago, and it's called Battlefield America. It's one of our top trends for 2012. Martial law in the USA, can it happen? It's happened. America has been decreed a war zone in which military rule can replace civilian rule. Imagine the United States of America, the land of liberty, a nation that intervenes around the world, overthrowing governments in the name of democracy, has robbed its own citizens of the last vestiges of their democracy. On December 1st, 2011, the United States voted 93-7 to pass into law the National Defense Authorization Act, a law that effectively strips Americans of their Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights, guaranteeing them due process of law and a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. We went on to say, John, how under that act as well, and by the way, I'm a political atheist. I don't have an agenda in this. I don't believe in political gods or believe in political parties as a religion. I'm on my own, so I'm not either side is, it's what it is. They also repealed in this law that was signed by President Obama on New Year's Eve of 2011, the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. And under that act, the military was prohibited to take on military duties, police duties. The military was prohibited to take on police duties. That was repealed. And we saw that repeal take place in Boston. To me, and again, I'm only speaking for myself, I don't tell people what to believe, what to think. Our motto at the Trends Journal is think for yourself. To me, it was a disgrace of American democracy, of what happened when cops and troopers are going into people's homes with enough ammunition
to lead the Battle of the Bulge and forcing people out of their homes with no warrants. To me, closing down an entire city to find one kid, this isn't the America that I grew up in. And I went back to the times during in the UK and Ireland during the times of the IRA. You know, bombs would go off. They were going off a lot. They didn't close down the countries, the cities, or the areas. So to me, and I was going back and doing some research, and when did this really start to take effect like this? And I realized, going again back to my book, Trends 2000, I wrote about how when the Oklahoma bombing took place, an editorial from USA Today, of all places, criticized the Clinton administration for taking away our Fourth Amendment rights as an excuse following that incident. And then I started thinking about this last incident that they had with this kid that went out of his mind up here in Connecticut, this Adam Lanza. And all of a sudden, the kid goes nuts, boom, let's have gun control. And now what we just saw in Boston, let's close down the city, let's take over, we're in charge, this is the way it's going to be. So a couple of maniacs commit some heinous acts, and Americans lose their rights. And so that's the way I see it.
Let's take a call. Excuse me. We'll go to Dan in Oshkosh first. Hi, Dan.
Hello there. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
Hey, listen. The speaker there was talking about in hopes that earlier in the conversation he was talking about in hopes that there would be an alternative fuel that would be available to us sometime soon. And I got a question: why aren't we utilizing the cannabis hemp plant for an awesome clean burning fuel, ethanol, methanol, biodiesel? It burns dioxide, not carbon monoxide. And Henry Ford ran his vehicles with it, made car body parts out of it. It's just an unbelievably gift from God, as far as I'm concerned. That plant is, but yet we don't utilize it for anything. It's been demonized worldwide.
Well, it's been demonized, particularly in the United States. And again, I have to laugh. There's an article today about taxing marijuana and in the governments that are pushing it through, particularly in Colorado, the states. And I started to think, all of a sudden, smoking weed's okay as long as we can make some money on it, taxing it. And I grew up in the Bronx and in Yonkers, and I remember every now and then, they'd bust these guys that used to run the numbers. And then as a young man, I was the assistant to the secretary of the New York State Senate. I was 23 years old. And I remember when they passed Lotto. And all of a sudden it became legal because the government could make money on it. I'm saying, wait a minute. I used to hear all these guys say how terrible it was, people playing the numbers, but now the government's into it. I got it. If you're not in it, you can't win it. And now they have people playing this stuff that can least afford it. To answer your question, when they could figure out a way how to make money on it, and when they don't have the pressures from the lobbyists who pay the bills to the politicians that are stopping this from happening, then it will happen. Whether it's that, and by the way, in this new TrendsJournal, we have a number of new breaking energy possibilities. And again, we take a neutral stance on all of this. We only put down the facts, but there seem to be some promising things in the future, and it could change the game.
And I really want to talk about energy. I want to talk about energy after the news break. We've only got about a minute until we have to take a break, so I don't really want to launch a big topic like that. I just want to go back to what you were talking about in terms of what has happened after a number of these national incidents, and that is, what's the alternative for law enforcement if they can't shut down an area in order to search for a suspect in a case where they didn't know if there were other bombs or not, and there were some legitimate concerns about public safety? Where's the balance point here?
Well, the balance point, it's an overreaction. They closed 100 square miles. We got a 19-year-old kid loose. 100 square miles. It wasn't that they set off dirty bombs or, I mean, these were pressure cooker bombs. So that was the major threat right there. And again, when you quotes from Benjamin Franklin and others that if we give away our freedoms for security, we deserve neither. They closed down Amtrak from New York to Boston. And by the way, John, they didn't get their man. They lifted the state of siege at 6 o'clock. It wasn't until this guy went outside and had a smoke and saw that the top of his boat was opened and went in there and looked at them there, and there's the kid laying there wounded, and the guy calls the cops. So after all of this, they didn't get their man. So, to me, it's, there has to be a balance. And by the way, I got in a lot of trouble back. You could go to our website, and if we run out of time, just let me know. We'll pick it up later. And TrendsJournal.com, and you go to the forecast page, and you see terrorism. On December 14th, 2000, USA Today used to run my top trends. And the one for 2001 was, 2001 won't be our year, TrendsSeer says. And I'll pick it up later.
Okay, and we'll talk about that. We will also pick up on where you think energy is going and your suggestions there for what people ought to be thinking about. We're talking trends today on At Issue. 800-642-1234. Join the conversation. We'll be back after the news to continue our talk with Gerald Celente and with you. I'm John Munson. It's At Issue on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. We're talking trends on At Issue. Today I'm John Munson. My guest is Gerald Celente, publisher of the TrendsJournal and founder and director of the TrendsResearchInstitute. And we had to break for the news there as you were kind of in mid-thought. So why don't we finish talking about that, and then I want to go into what your thoughts are on what the next big thing is going to be in energy.
Yes. Anyway, so what happened, 9/11 happened. The headline read, 2001 won't be our year, TrendsSeer says. Remember, this is several months before 9/11, and I warned that a wave of anti-Americanism was sweeping the globe, and Americans wouldn't be safe at home or abroad. And all of a sudden, I used to be on Oprah, the Today Show. I mean, everybody. And I'm getting calls left and right. What happened? What happened? I said, what do you mean, what happened? I've been writing about this for years. It's American foreign policy. You can't keep going into all of these countries, propping up dictators. The people are going into poverty. They hate their governments. And the United States is keeping them in place. No. They hate our freedom and liberty. Oh, come on. Grow up. You don't believe that line, do you? Well, apparently most people did. And the same thing now. Let us suppose for one moment, without accusing anybody of anything, that the people were radicalized and we're doing this Boston tragedy as a result of conditions that they blame the United States on creating. Let's say they weren't these kids. Let's say they were Iraqis and they lost their family or their homes or their country or they're Afghans or they were Libyans. Regardless of who they were. Go back to the beginning of this year. France invades Mali, that old French Sudan. I guess they missed it. Right away, the people in Mali, the so-called terrorists, one man's terrorist, another one's freedom fighter, and again, I'm not saying who was what, but they said, as a result of France, and this is right after it happened, going into Mali, there's going to be, quote, payback. The payback happened just literally days later with the Algerian hostage crisis that killed dozens on that remote field, that oil field that they were working in. So what I'm saying, John, is that when we're talking about losing our rights and what are they supposed to do in response to these atrocities, is how about staying out of other people's countries? How about just as a ridiculous thought, living by what this country was founded upon, what our founding fathers warned us about, not becoming involved in foreign entanglements. If you're going to go into somebody else's country and kill a lot of people and destroy the place, you got a lot of angry people that want to get even with you. So to me, that's the issue. And this is it's a cause and effect. And people aren't looking at the cause, and even as we're in the midst of this Boston crisis, the causes are not being discussed.
Let's take a call here because I think this caller is going to be on the topic that we're on now. Jess in Milwaukee, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I've listened to you on YouTube, and I agree with, I don't want to say everything you say because 100% following is wrong on anything. But I served in the Navy in the 80s when Reagan was president. We had faced the Soviet Union. We had 20,000 nuclear warheads facing us, and we gave up no civil liberties and no constitutional rights or guarantees. I don't understand why a tragedy of Boston or Aurora or Newtown supposedly happens, and yet everybody loses their mind. We can't think for ourselves. We can't protect ourselves. And they strip us of our right to protect ourselves, not only from these so-called terrorists, but from the government intrusion into our lives as well.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned YouTube. If you go to the Gerald Celente channel or the TrendsJournal channel on YouTube, you'll see my piece on the state of siege. And I find it, I'm very saddened by it, that our rights are being stripped away from us from so-called, quote, authorities. I want to read you a quote. This is in today's Financial Times. This is from Lindsey Graham, the senator from, South Carolina. And here's what he had to say. This is Tuesday. We are fighting an adversary that is transforming itself all over the globe. We need to broaden our ability to go after the enemy. The one mistake I will not tolerate is the mistake of believing that we are not at war. You want to talk about arrogance? The one mistake I will not tolerate. Hey, take it easy. Yeah, I will not tolerate. We're not at war. We are waging war. They're celebrating George Bush's new library today. And I read, the transcript of Bush on CNN. And I'll let history decide whether or not my actions were right. What do you mean let history decide? We have all the information in front of us. By the time history decides, it'll all be whitewashed and lost. Saddam Hussein did not have weapons of mass destruction and ties to al-Qaeda, period, paragraph. We spent $1 trillion, an estimated 1 million people killed and the country destroyed. You think they're angry at America? You think they're angry in Afghanistan? Oh, a drone just killed, just by mistake, 10 kids. We do Trends in the News each day as part of the subscription. And on the Tuesday following, on the 16th, following the Boston incident, I said there was a bombing yesterday. And I started to read the bombings. 13 in Kirkuk, 15 in Baghdad, 7 in Pakistan, 3 in Yemen. And then I finished it with the Boston one. There were 55 people that were killed as a result, directly or indirectly, of United States foreign policy. Where's the outrage?
Good question. 800-642-1234, 800-642-1234. Still space for you to get in on the program. Let's talk about energy trends. You were talking before the news that there were a number of things on the horizon that you were pretty excited about. Let's talk about that for a little bit.
All right. First of all, I'm not the energy guy in the TrendsJournal. Ben Davis is, so I'll just do the best I can in looking at the things that he's looking at. There are a number of breaks in things called hydrino power. They're taking carbon out of the air and mixing it with other things, and there are a number of breakthroughs in there. And I'm really not versed well enough to talk about the technicalities of it. But we all have it spelled out in chapter and verse. There are studies, tests going on, some of them failures, some of them real. But the promising elements are here's one. Avisio claims to be drawing, quote, ambient energy from the air through an antenna on the vehicle that channels energy to the lone battery. So, and then he goes on to discuss exactly how this is being done. And again, I really believe that this could really look. Do you think would we have invaded Iraq if their major export was broccoli? Could we care about Libya if they weren't sitting on some of the most precious sweet crude in the world? So the whole Middle East policy changes. Do you think anybody would care about Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates? Oh, those wonderful United States allies. Yeah, you know the place where the women can't drive and they chop people's heads off in public. Our whole policy would change. So to me, it's to put the energy into creating an alternative energy. And again, I don't have the scientific details to give it justice, but the Trends Journal really does spell it out in detail.
Well, right now, the United States is enjoying a little bit of at least an energy boomlet, and the price of oil is coming down, at least in part, domestically, because we're producing so much more now all of a sudden. And I had a guest on yesterday who talked about the fact that manufacturing jobs are coming back to the United States, in part because of the availability of this new energy resource that we hadn't developed in the past. How does that figure into your trends forecasting?
Well, again, in the last Trends Journal, we did a major study on hydrofracking and the ups and downs of it, and there are downsides, and something much more advanced than that. And let us not also forget. I'll give you an example about jobs coming back to the U.S. Just this last week, in Kentucky Louisville, I believe it was, that they announced that they're going to be building a Lexus plant there. They're getting $145 million in tax credits and other benefits that we, the people, have to pay the Japanese automaker to open a plant up in Kentucky. Oh, by the way, this isn't capitalism. In capitalism, you don't do this, neither do you bail out the too big to fails. The second issue is wages have declined so dramatically in the United States that it's now becoming cheaper to use very cheap help in the U.S. than doing it in other countries. So those are the other reasons why manufacturing's coming back, because they're giving them a lot of benefits, incentives, and low wages. But again, the hydrofracking, this isn't the kind of energy that we're talking about, something much more advanced than that. And I'm in upstate New York. I'm in Colonial Kingston, 2 hours north of New York City, and not far from the Marcellus Shale. And I have to tell you that the people around this area are fighting a tooth and nail.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems to be controversial pretty much anywhere. Wisconsin is one of the centers of frack sand mining in the country, and that's certainly a big issue here in the Badger State. We're going to take a short break, and Gerald Celente, when we come back, I want to talk about a few foreign policy trends and get your take on whether you think that the United States will end up in a land war in Korea or if we're going to be intervening in Syria based on the fact that the president had said the use of chemical weapons was a red line. Well, it's now pretty likely that the Syrian regime has crossed it. So what are we going to do? I'd like to get your take on where you think that's going. And we'll probably squeeze some calls in between now and the top of the hour as well. 800-642-1234. I'm John Munson. It's At Issue on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. It's At Issue on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. Tomorrow afternoon at 3, we're going to talk dinosaurs. And then, of course, at 4 o'clock on Fridays, it's your chance to tell us what you thought the top news story of the week was with your views on the news. Next hour, we're going to be talking about the situation at Guantanamo, which there's a hunger strike there, and they need about $200 million just to do maintenance. A lot of things going on down there we need to talk about it. 11 years into the use of Guantanamo Bay as a prison. This hour, we're talking about trends with trends forecaster Gerald Celente, and let's talk some foreign policy. A couple of big hot spots now. Let's go to the Korean Peninsula first. A lot of saber rattling, although the Defense Department says, well, they're talking tough, but they haven't mobilized their troops. They do have a rocket on a launching pad. Looks like it's ready to go. Is the United States likely to end up in a war on the Korean Peninsula, do you think?
I would highly doubt it. And if we all go back, and those of us all old enough to remember anything, this has been going on forever. Every couple of years, the North Korean fear starts to happen over and over again. But there's the other side of the story that isn't being reported much, and those are the sanctions that the United States has put on these countries, on North Korea, Iran, and others. And also, let's suppose, we're the United States, and all of a sudden China and North Korea are putting on major military drills on our borders and in our waters, near our waters. It's so provocative at so many different levels. And again, it goes back to the whole thing. That to call it policy is foreign. I ask you this, John. Tell me one foreign policy initiative that the United States has embarked upon in terms of war since World War II that has brought success. They failed in Vietnam. They failed in Iraq. It's a failure in Afghanistan. Libya is a disaster. It opened up for all of that radicalism to sweep through northern Africa. Of course, Mali was the first one to go after that. And now they're talking about Syria? How can anybody be serious listening to the people that every time they do something, it ends up in failure? Oh, I got an idea. Let's do AFRICOM. Yeah, I got it. We'll put our troops in 35 countries. Yeah, we'll show them how it's done.
Let's take a quick call from John in Algoma. John, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I guess I wanted to ask a question that goes beyond where your conversation is right now, and that is, if it's a given that the United States went from being, and this is a oversimplification, a liberator at the end of World War II, to a helper during the decolonialization period post-World War II, to the biggest bully on the block in the last 30 years.
What's the question? I'm sorry.
United States, what should foreign policy of the United States look like going forward if it's not what it is today, and if we are to shed ourselves of the image as well as the fact of being the biggest bully on the block?
Again, to me, it's going back to what this country was founded upon. You read anybody. You read Washington, you read Madison, you read Jefferson, you read Franklin, all of them. We do not become involved in foreign entanglements. I'm reading the news today, and I'm seeing up in Des Plaines over there. I used to live in Chicago, very familiar with the area, how they have floods going on, floods throughout the area. Our infrastructure is in disrepair. It's voted a D+ by the civil engineers. It's going to cost $3 trillion just to bring it back to normal. Our economies, the jobs that we have, though you sound like you're old enough to remember when people could go out and get it and earn a job and make a living wage. What do we do? Here, the one quote that everybody seems to know, but everybody seems to push it out of their head, is General Dwight D. Eisenhower, 5-star general, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, and 2-term president, and a Republican at that, for all you conservative Republicans out there. He leaves office and warns the American people that the military-industrial complex is taking over the country, robbing it of the genius of the scientists, the sweat of its laborers, and the future of the children. Here we are. Welcome to 2013. We could have alternative energies. Look at the trains. Anybody that's traveled around this world knows that we have third world rail in this country. Look what's happening to us. We are, to me, again, only speaking for myself, to me, I want my money in America. Every country, you're on your own. We have to take care of our own. I'm not xenophobic. I travel the world. But, hey, we're not here to solve everybody's problems. They created them. Let them solve them. We have our own here. So to me, it's going back to a foreign policy and a nation that respects the foundation upon which we were built upon.
I noticed that China and France were having some meetings, and one of the things they were talking about was a world with no superpowers, which seemed to be kind of aimed at the United States.
Well, France is one to talk, I mean, here they are in Mali. But, here's on the China issue. I don't believe China is going to be, in our near future, the next 10, 15, 20 years, a global threat. I think what you're going to start seeing China doing is what the United States did at the most powerful point of our creativity and growth, and that is developing their own internal economy. They have 1.2 billion people, and they start doing more and more internally and building their own economy internally with less globalization. I think you're going to see a very different China. And by the way, that to me is all, people say, well, you're saying all the problems. What are some of the solutions? So my solutions are, when was it working better? When did we have a better nation? When was our quality of life higher? And I go back to, I remember, as a young guy in college, not learning much, but learning a couple of things. I learned about the Robinson-Patman Act, the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Antitrust Act, that allowed people to open up shops, hardware stores, mom-and-pop shops, grocery stores, clothing stores, haberdashers. I have a quaint one for you. How about a stationery store? No more of that. We're going to get rid of all these rules and now make it possible so that you had that stationery store, it's gone, and now it's Staples, and now it's Office Max. That hardware store, you'll be lucky to get a job in Home Depot's or Lowe's, it's gone. They changed the laws that were put in place when the robber barons were robbing this country from the 19th to 20th century and turned it over. There were no such thing as hedge funds. There were no such thing as private equity groups or buyout firms. The laws of it. How about the Glass-Steagall Act? There's a beauty for you. You're in Wisconsin. There was no interstate banking. They put these laws in place so the few couldn't grab everything. And the same thing goes back with NAFTA. Go back to NAFTA. Look at the curve. They promised us that, hey, we're going to have service sector jobs. We don't make our own shirts or shoes in this country. To me, it's rebuild America. Have a renaissance. Look at the quality this country used to have. Go to that website, Decaying Detroit. Look at these buildings that are going into dust and the craftsmanship that used to be put into the soul of this nation, and now they turned it into big box stores. You have all the joy of walking into a large self-storage unit to buy something and save 15 cents on a dollar. So to me, everything is in place, and I'm looking for the Renaissance. I want a recreation, and I'm not naive. This wasn't a perfect country. There was the civil rights issues. There were terrible issues in this country. But to take the morality and move it forward, but to take the craftsmanship and quality and bring it out from the past.
And that's, I think, where we're going to have to leave it because we're pretty much out of time. Gerald Celente, thank you for an informative and entertaining hour.
Thank you so much for having me, John.
Gerald Celente is publisher of the TrendsJournal and founder and director of TrendsResearchInstitute. Katie Matson produced this hour programming. We had on-air production from Rachel Owens, technical production this hour from Chris Molina. If you missed part of it and would like to go back and listen again, you can get the podcast by going to WPR.org, click on the Add Issue link, and it should be right there. By the way, tomorrow afternoon at 3, we're going to talk dinosaurs. That's right, dinosaurs. Boy, that's going to be a fun hour. I love dinosaurs. And then, of course, at 4, it's your views on the news coming up tomorrow afternoon here on At Issue. I'm John Munson. It is At Issue. You're listening to it on the Ideas Network of Wisconsin Public Radio. Stick around, another hour to come.